One of the whatever the live final that DraftKings hosts called. I think top prize is a fat $2 million, and he used one of the stacks we talked about last week. It was the one that I was on, almost won me a lot of money as well. The Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, and then I think he ran it back with Emmanuel Sanders. If not, he ran it back with George Kittle, who was fine as well. So he might not be here, but he's with us in spirit, and we hope that he takes down a fat $2 million. So I'll get into it solo. We can run through it just like usual, and I'll answer all the questions at the end. So at the top of our slate, we have the highest scoring game. My, oh my, this total has risen. It is Tennessee versus Houston. Tennessee are 3-point home favorites. The total is now up to 51. And really, it's kind of easy to talk about this game because it's just like play everyone. I think, I want to try and leverage the ownership in this game. And if you're playing the Millie, I think you almost have to fade this game if it's going to be that highly owned. I can pull up ownership, but the last time I checked, we were looking at top 5 ownership for Derrick Henry, top 5 ownership for Corey Davis, for AJ Brown, top 5 ownership for Ryan Tannehill, who are all great plays. That's why they're going to be so highly owned. But the thing is, if Houston shows up and then we have a classic Ryan Tannehill collapse game, which like his career is just one collapse game, replaying 6 seasons in a row until he got out of Miami. So I don't think it's impossible that it happens again. So I think if it's going to be so highly owned right now, I'm looking at Ryan Tannehill as QB1. The rest of them not quite as highly owned, but Ryan Tannehill is kind of where it starts. I would say you are going to want to look to the Texans defense, and then they correlate pretty well with Carlos Hyde, which makes sense. You're going to get a lot of positive game script and a lot of getting establish the run out there. Bill O'Brien sends out Carlos Hyde to really lay it on thick because Bill O'Brien does truly love to establish it. So that's what Bobby Gomez sending his thoughts to me right now as he prepares his lineup. So that's who correlates best with the defense. I think I'm only looking to play that Texans defense if I'm like trying to take down the Millie, which I don't really play the Millie maker. I just haven't had any luck with it. So in smaller fields, it's just the total is too much to like try and leverage unless you're getting up to 50, 60,000 entrants. Not really something I'd be looking to do. But if not, I think that's a great play. On the other, like on the Texans side, I think your Will Fuller expected to play. That's one important note. And anytime he's been active, it has really put a ceiling on DeAndre Hopkins' volume. If I'm looking to stack the Texan side of things, obviously you're going Watson. I would rather go with a Will Fuller and a tight end combo. I think both are fine. Akins has gotten more volume in recent weeks, but before that, it was all Darren Fells. I would lean on it being Darren Fells, but either in play. They both had many weeks with touchdowns this season. I think Darren Fells is tied for the league lead in touchdowns. Mark Andrews, he might have passed him last night. Or Thursday night. I don't know. But before this week, he was tied for the league lead in receiving touchdowns. Or another player you could run it back with is Duke Johnson. I think that's where I'd go on that side. The other side, all the guys I just named. The only thing I would mention is that if you're running a Ryan Tannehill stack, I think you just have to get Corey Davis in there to be different because there are going to be an immense amount of Ryan Tannehill, AJ Brown, and I still think there's going to be a decent amount of Ryan Tannehill, AJ Brown, Derrick Henry. So to really separate yourself from the field, I think you have to get Corey Davis. You could go Jonnu Smith, but I think you're getting more volume from a decent amount more volume from Corey Davis. And Jonnu Smith has also had some volume taken away by Anthony Ferguson. So I think that's probably how you have to attack the Tannehill side if you want to be different. In cash, I think both the quarterbacks are viable. I'm still afraid that we get a Ryan Tannehill collapse, so I'd rather pay a little extra for Deshaun Watson, but the price is right on both sites for both these guys, including Ryan Tannehill. To move on to our next game, we have Kansas City versus Denver. An interesting line on this one. Kansas City are 10.5-point home favorites. That line opened at 12, went down to 10, maybe even hit 9 at some books, jumped back up to 10.5, the book I'm looking at. The total has dropped significantly to down 2.5 to 44.5. As far as the slate goes, it's actually kind of low. We have a lot of good games on this slate, so 44.5 isn't all that appealing. I mean, you can always get these boom games out of Mahomes, so I don't mind playing him. But and they do, to be fair, have one of the higher team totals of the slate at 27.5. But now you're getting Tennessee almost matching them implied team total of 27. You're getting Russell Wilson, his implied team total of 27.75. So I don't think you need to go to Mahomes this week. And I don't know. I mean, Vegas doesn't really expect the Broncos to put up much of a fight here. So I don't know if you have to have, Mahomes throwing 40 times. If I'm playing this, I'm not stacking. I'm just taking one-offs. And I think if I'm taking one-offs, it's either Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill. We really haven't seen a ton of ceiling from Travis Kelce this season. I still think it's in there. It's just, the Chiefs offense regressed. You can't throw 50 touchdowns every single year of your career. And, they're not going to do that this year. So I think I'd just be running one-offs of this, and I think you can always run it back with Cortland Sutton. Noah Fant is expected to play, and Damian Williams is expected out. Those are the two pieces of news. I wasn't running, and you should not have been running anyone from the Kansas City backfield anyways. Last week, Spencer Ware was signed off the streets. He was with the team earlier in the year, but he still had not been with the team in many weeks. Signed off the streets, led the team in snaps, might have led them in touches, but they really operated this three-way committee, and they don't even run the ball that much. So no reason to play any of their backs. If one of them goes off, I wasn't going to predict it. I doubt anyone was really going to predict it. So not running any backs. And when Tyreek Hill goes off, it seems like either he goes off. I mean, it seems like this has been historically what has happened, is that either he goes off or the rest of the team goes off. I think it's just his ability to end a drive means you can't get a drive where Travis Kelce catch 2 passes for 30 yards. You can't get McCole Hardman another 2 for 25 plus a rush attempt from Mahomes. When Tyreek Hill scores, it ends the drive and nobody else scores on that drive. So that's probably a good reason why that he doesn't actually he doesn't correlate as well with his teammates. So that's probably all I'd look to in this game. It's been really tough for me to get in. Like, I'm not interested in Phillip Lindsay or Royce Freeman. Phillip Lindsay been getting all the work, but I think this running back slate is really good for, it's rife with running back value. You just don't need to pay whatever Phillip Lindsay costs. Hasn't been scoring, hasn't been efficient. Another player we've seen regression hit with. You just can't be the most elusive back in the NFL every year, except maybe Aaron Jones. But even Alvin Kamara, definitely can be attributed to his injury, but that's part of the thing is the past 2 years, he was mostly healthy. I think he missed a final game, week 15 or something, but he's been pretty much healthy the past 2 years. And it allowed him to be his peak self. And now he hasn't been as healthy, and it's greatly impacted his ability to do the things he does. So that's probably all I have on this game. Next game we have is the Giants versus Miami. A lot of good value in this one with the Giants 3-point favorites, a 45-point total. On the Giants side, all of the receivers are in play because Miami has just been stomped by every single passing game they face. And ironically, they haven't been as good to the run, but I think that's just because teams it's so easy to pass against them. You don't really need to run. So all of them are in play, but Darius Slayton's been getting the most work. And because he played on a primetime spot, he didn't get priced up, even though he exploded at primetime, over 100 yards, 2 scores, broke every single showdown slate. So I'm fine with just dipping back into that, basically because of the volume. It's not that I think you're point chasing, I think you're volume chasing, and that's how you should be playing fantasy football in DFS. So yeah, the past 4 weeks, 8 targets, 9 targets, 7 targets, 14 targets, 2 games of over 120 yards and 2 scores in each of those games. I'm not sure if he does it again, but he is the best bet. You're not getting any of those performances out of Golden Tate or Sterling Shepard. Eli Manning, underpriced, but I think there are better ugly quarterback stacks on the slate. The total in this one, 45, is not worthy of massive stacking, and especially the offenses aren't concentrated enough. Both running backs, Saquon now just continually getting underpriced, but mostly because he sucks. At least this season in fantasy, he sucks. Has 1 game of over 25 points, I believe, and Wayne Gallman has a better game than that on his record this season. So he's underpriced, and he gets an awful defense. But I don't know if you have to fade a chalk running back out of him, CMC, and in this game as well, Patrick Laird. I'm looking to fade him, Derrick Henry, another probably chalky running back, and Todd Gurley. I think he's probably one of the better fades because it's like fading Alvin Kamara. It's just worked. The thing is, it's just worked, especially in the back half of the season. The same is true for Saquon since getting injured and coming back. He really has not been the dynamic back we've seen. Eli Manning coming back helps because he's a check down artist. But yeah, I think I'm only playing Saquon if I'm stacking this game. And right now, none of my builds have a stack of this game. Patrick Laird on the other side, probably the best value of the slate. Maybe some of the cheap receivers, you could say that, but I don't think obviously you lock in as much volume. So I think Patrick Laird last week got 15 of 19 targets and 4 of 5 or 15 of 19 carries and 4 of 5 running back receptions. So in a matchup against an awful Giants defense where they're only 3-point dogs, and that's because they play in New York, that means these teams are equal on a neutral field. Vegas will tend to give 3 points to the home team. So Patrick Laird, the best spot he's been at in recent weeks, getting all of the volume. Don't see how you can move away from him. So that's probably all I have for this game. Let's move on. We have Washington versus the Eagles. The Eagles last week, I guess it's a 6.5-point Washington underdog. 39-point total, has moved down 1 point. Totally off this game. You don't need to play the 39-point total games on such a good slate. On the Eagles side, I think it'll be interesting. I don't know what the plans are for Boston Scott. At 5,900, Miles Sanders is still a great value because last week in the primetime spot as well, he was getting a large portion of the work until I think he just had a little calf injury, came back in. But man, Boston Scott earned himself a massive role, and he should be their 3 down or he should be their 3rd down back, their receiving back, and their 2-minute drill back. He was putting dudes on skates. It was disgusting, and I want to see him more. And I think it was reasonable to expect to see him more. So if you take the receiving game out of Miles Sanders' work, he's not awfully interesting. He's eclipsed 15 carries once this entire season. He's only done it once since becoming the starting back. He had 17 carries against Miami of all teams. And a big part of his value is 5 targets in each of the past 3 games. If that goes away, I'm not immensely interested, even though they're large favorites. He's still on the road. The other big value in this game, though, the biggest value of this game, Greg Ward. I think he saw 8 or 9 targets last week, had a handful in the end zone and couldn't bring any of them down. Only went 4 of 34, but we're looking at the volume. We're looking at the snaps, 77 of 89 snaps. He is, him and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside are their only receivers that were active last week. I believe Nelson Aguilar out, Jordan Howard out. The only receivers that were active last week that will suit up this week with Alshon Jeffrey on IR for the year. I think they called up somebody. I'm sure they called up somebody from the practice squad, but it's difficult to see that making much of an impact. So Greg Ward at 3K flat, maybe the best wide receiver value of the slate. I think you're going to look between him, Chris Conley, D.D. Westbrook if you have a little extra salary. And if you want to roll the Justin Watson, Brashad Perriman dice, that is also in play for your punt play. But I like running multiple punt plays because they're such good values this week. I think Greg Ward and Chris Conley are the best punt plays, with D.D. Westbrook being close behind. And if you're up at D.D. Westbrook, Darius Slayton at 47, also a great punt play. On the Washington side, I have very little interest. I think if you wanted to run I don't know, there's not really, I can't get behind anybody on a team that scores so few points. I can't get behind Adrian Peterson, who, although he's going to get all of the work, there are other backs that are also going to get all of the work that aren't on the Washington offense. Terry McLaurin, if you wanted to stack this game, 5,300 is not a ton to pay for a dude who has I don't want to say slate breaking upside, but massive upside. He's got a 29-point game a while back, another 26-point game, 17-point game, but since then he has not eclipsed 16 points since what is this? September, October? Yeah, since the beginning second week of October. I'm not playing anybody on this offense. So, and the tight ends are both great values for Philadelphia, because I think we're going to see obviously we're going to see 3 down Zach Ertz, probably going to see 3 down Dallas Goedert too. They mixed in a little bit of, I believe it's Josh Perkins. They mixed in a little bit of him, who they called up from the practice squad a few weeks ago, I think. Not interested in him, and I still think Dallas Goedert plays a large portion of the team snaps, if not like all of them. So yeah, he played over 2/3 of the snaps, I believe, over 2/3 of the snaps on against the Giants. I think he'll even get higher than that. So always in play. Now with the extra work, he's just going to kind of operate as a second or third receiver on the team. And of course, Zach Ertz. 6K is a lot. I think he's 6K in DK. Yeah, 6K, a lot to pay up for a tight end. But man, the volume he's going to see is stupid. So I do not blame you for going there as well. If you have the money to spend a tight end, I think he is probably the best points per dollar play at the high end. Next game on the slate, one of my favorite games, the Lions versus Tampa Bay. Lions 5.5-point home dogs, a 45.5-point total. I think the offenses, it's only 45 total isn't crazy, but the offenses are concentrated enough here, especially on the Lions side, that I am very interested in stacking this game. Both quarterbacks in play, although I'm a little concerned with Jameis Winston's ability to huck it deep. He suffered that, I think it was a fracture on his thumb. He's playing today, as all reports have said, but I'm not sure if he'll be as aggressive, which would concern me because that's what makes Jameis so good at fantasy football, is just continually chucking it deep. And also without Mike Evans, I think his ceiling is probably a bit lower. So I would rather look to the David Blau side. I think you're obviously looking at Kenny Golladay, especially with the loss of Marvin Jones. They really have nobody else there to run deep. They have Chris Lacey, who's their third receiver now, but I'm pretty sure Chris Lacey is a slow, underperforming college player. He's not like awfully athletic. He wasn't productive in college. I don't know his life story, but his stats say he's not really worth playing. So I would just, 4.51, like above average speed, but nothing special. Didn't produce anything in college. Wasn't like a high yards per reception guy in college. So didn't really make much of that speed. He's not a great athlete. Doesn't have a ton of burst or agility. Yeah, not interested in him. I would run it with either Danny Amendola or possibly JD McKissick. I think Amendola is the clear play though. Has been getting volume out of the slot all season, and now they have less volume to go around, or they have less volume being taken away by Marvin Jones. So I think the stack here is pretty easy for me. It's Amendola, it's Kenny Golladay. Bo Scarborough dealing with an injury is a game-time decision, but they expect him to play, although he's still tested out in warm-ups. I think that means we could see a little bit more of J.D. McKissick. So if you want to get crazy, I think you can run it with him. He's 3,300. That's actually not the worst idea to run it with J.D. McKissick. But I just think the running back values, again, are too great even for this correlation play. McKissick just has not had upside this season. So the correlation doesn't trump how good the running back value is on the slate. On the other side, Chris Godwin set up to absolutely smash without Mike Evans. This Tampa Bay defense has been targeted deep downfield, and if Godwin is getting more of those Mike Evans deep targets, even a few more of them, he'll just crush. And then outside of him, you're looking at, I would imagine we get Justin Watson playing the ex-Mike Evans role, and then we get Scotty Miller and Brashad Perriman rotating on the flanker role. That would make me very interested in Justin Watson, but I'm not confident enough in that projection, which one of their popular beat reporters, I haven't talked to him before, so I apologize for not remembering his name. Greg Allman, I think it's Greg Allman, was saying and he expects it to be like a full-blown committee. Justin Watson does fill in that role, but they really rotate what they're doing with their receivers. So because of that, I'm not confident enough to look to Watson in cash. I do think he is a great GPP play, and I'd probably prioritize getting like a Perriman or a Scotty Miller much below him. It's like tier 1 Mike Evans, tier 1 Chris Godwin, tier 2 Justin Watson. Then I'm really not too awfully concerned. I'd rather look to a guy like OJ Howard, who OJ Howard, what have you done to me this season? Just the way they're using him is so awfully inconsistent. Anytime he makes a mistake, even how like comically hilarious when he drops the ball from behind his back it is, they bench him and then they just get him back the next 2 weeks, where he's played over 60 snaps out of just about 80 in each of the past 2 weeks. That's like well over 75% of the team snaps, 11 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. He is a very good play, and I doubt he gets very popular. So, man, that's a very solid way to run it back, especially it would leverage that Chris Godwin ownership. So not interested in the running backs. Ronald Jones is fine. They've just been such a committee, and much like OJ Howard, anytime Ronald Jones misses a single pass block, Bruce Arians, like being the most vindictive man he is, benches him for the rest of the game. So not interested in that. On to the next game. Seattle going east to face Kyle Allen and the Carolina Panthers. They are 6-point dogs, Kyle Allen. The Panthers are with a 49.5-point total. This total is up 1 point. I think that puts it probably as the second highest total of the slate behind that Texans game. So things I've noticed, things that have been true for the Panthers offense is home dog Christian McCaffrey has just crushed. That's been, even dating back to last year, one of the best times to play Christian McCaffrey is if he's at home and he's an underdog. It's been a great spot for him. And DJ Moore in losses is just crushing. That's his spot. He's averaging more targets, receptions, touchdowns. That's where most of his touchdowns come from, because that's something he struggled with throughout the season, is just finding the end zone. But he was crushing outside of that. And his 100-yard games. His 100-yard games have also been more frequent in losses. So I think it's a very viable, one of my 3 favorite ugly stacks of the week, 1 being David Blau, 2 being Kyle Allen. You can run a Kyle Allen, Ian Thomas, another guy, Greg Olsen, I believe, is out. I can double check on that, but I don't think he's playing. Yeah, Kyle Allen, Greg Olsen out. So you can run Ian Thomas at 3,100, who got 10 targets last week, played almost all of the snaps. There was rumors that they were going to run a tight end committee. Maybe they ran extra tight end sets, but they really did not take they took him off for 10 of 71 snaps the entire game. Ian Thomas, I think, is probably number 2 behind DJ Moore in terms of prioritizing your stacks of Kyle Allen. Man, Curtis Samuel can just not catch on with this, the way they're playing. I just think the way Kyle Allen plays is perfect for DJ Moore, running these like middle slants, these sort of high percentage, more shallow routes. And they run so many routes, and they target him at least a little bit with Curtis Samuel, and they just can't connect. And I don't think the routes he's running are very good for Kyle Allen to be throwing. It's just it's tough scenes out here for Curtis Samuel, running wind sprints every game, getting all of them air yards and not doing anything else. And Christian McCaffrey, obviously, I think with all the value, I'm prioritizing him in cash because it's pretty easy to get there. You can run him with Kyle Allen, but I don't think you have to. He's been pretty negatively correlated, and I think that's because a lot of Christian McCaffrey's best games have come when he breaks off these massive chunk runs, like when he gets a 30-yard run and a 50-yard run in the same game. And that doesn't help Kyle Allen. And his he hasn't been like just the amazing like he hasn't scored a ton in the receiving game. He doesn't have like multi-touchdown receiving games. And he gets there in the receiving game by going 9 for 70. That's 16 points for him. But it doesn't help Kyle Allen a ton. 3 points for Kyle Allen. These like very PPR heavy receivers, which Christian McCaffrey is, they don't necessarily help their quarterback so much. And they also burn a bit of clock by having all of these, they're basically just runs, having these deeper runs by getting like a 3 catches for 20 yards. So they get a lot of DraftKings value out of that. Kyle Allen, not so much. I still think it's very viable, and I'm going to try to stack McCaffrey in those Kyle Allen stacks. But if you want to get different, I'm sure that's a way to go. And on the other side, it's pretty clear for me, Tyler Lockett has not been 100% since getting injured, and he has not produced. I think he has like 100 yards in the 4 games since, maybe it's 3 games. But for Tyler Lockett, that is not typical for him. And the other receiver who I would be looking to much more so would be DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf basically getting the same amount of volume with same amount of targets with more air yards as Tyler Lockett. Yeah, 50, 90. Yeah, I think Tyler Lockett at like 107 yards or something roundabout there, just over 100 yards in his past 4 games. Since the Tampa Bay game, where he had 152 yards, man, he just has not been right. And it's tough for me to play him. I think much like a Cooper Kupp, where we haven't seen, like we've seen just a much less version of him in recent weeks. It's an interesting contrarian tournament play, but it just projects so poorly that I'm kind of off of it. I don't think you need to get that minus EV in terms of the just points projection on a slate this good. I'd much more look to DK Metcalf, who, unlike Tyler Lockett, has in his past 4 games, 3 games over 70 yards. He's got more targets. He's got, 29 targets in his past 4 games. And he's been catching all of his targets with Tyler Lockett, unlike Tyler Lockett hasn't been doing. So that's where I'd look at there. I think Russell Wilson as an underdog on the road. Not great. Underdog, hopefully that means he passes more, would be awesome. They're not underdogs, but on the road, hopefully we see Kyle Allen, the Panthers, maybe keep up. I think they could. I'd be betting them against the spread after this line is moved. So if the Panthers can keep up a closer neutral game script, Russell Wilson would be a great play, but if they're favorites and Chris Carson gets all the work, which without Rashad Penny is expected, that would that'd be a tough scene for Russell Wilson, which it's been all year. Brian Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll love establishing the run and love depriving us of sweet, sweet Russell Wilson. So Chris Carson, I'm not going to him in cash because I still find trouble projecting him for a ton of receiving game work, which unlike Patrick Laird, unlike Christian McCaffrey, unlike Todd Gurley at his price, I just Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley. I'd put him like as my 5th or 6th priority running back. He hasn't gotten over 4 targets since week 1? Yeah, since week 1. So I don't know. Not super interested. I could see how you get there because he's going to get a large share of the work against an awful Panthers rushing defense as a favorite. I think he's a fine play, but in cash, his receiving game isn't there. And in tournaments, he's looking 25+% owned. So I'd rather leverage that with Russell Wilson stacks, even if they're not in the best Russell Wilson spot. I can't bring myself to play a non-pass catching back at 25% owned. I can hardly play any back at 25% owned. So, last thing before we move on, Jacob Hollister at 3,800, I think is if you don't run Ian Thomas, because I don't run 2 tight ends, although it has worked in recent weeks, and I think this could be a spot with a lot of tight end value where it works again. I'm typically not running it. You could run it. It worked last week. I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago with Higbee Doyle. It was like the optimal. But I think Jacob Hollister, one of the better tight end plays on the slate. There are like 3 cash game tight ends, and Higbee at 3,900, Ian Thomas at 31. Hollister is clearly number 3, but he has seen 28 targets over the past 4 weeks. Hasn't scored in the past 3 weeks, but the volume has been there. If you're running Russell Wilson, I don't see why you don't stack him with Jacob Hollister and TK Metcalf. I'm probably not looking anywhere else with my stacks. Tyler Lockett, I'm not playing large enough field GPPs to get him in, but anything can change, and he's an awesome player. If he's finally healthy, that'd be a great play. Next game, we have a game I have very little interest in, Green Bay versus Chicago. Green Bay are 4.5-point favorites. It's a 40.5-point total, one of the lowest totals on the slate. Yeah, and on a slate this good, I don't see why you have to go here. I think the owner, I'm not sure what the ownership looks like on Aaron Jones, but I'm guessing after the blow-up spot last week, it's not it's not going to be like a 2 to 3% Aaron Jones. I'm guessing 6 to 7%. I don't think you gain a ton of leverage by playing him there. I just think, we've seen Jamal Williams cut into both his receiving and rushing game work at Aaron Jones' price. Fire him up in season long and all, but Jamal Williams just gets too much work for me to like confidently play Aaron Jones unless he's going to be 2% owned. Yeah, over the past 4 weeks, Jamal Williams averaging over 10 carries, and until last week, he was the receiving game back. He had 12 targets in the past 2 weeks before last week. I think they got Aaron Jones more involved in the passing game, which is nice to see, but I don't know. It's not for me. I'd rather look to Devontae Adams, but it's hard for me to find any stacking value in this game. Maybe you could run Tariq Cohen, Allen Robinson, always viable, but in a game that's not supposed to have a ton of scoring, and I don't have any strong lean to like bet the over or anything. Not really for me. These are the only 2 guys I'd play, Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones. On the other side, no love for David Montgomery for me. He's like 32nd in the league in targets for running backs, despite being 14th in carries. They have Tariq Cohen, and he's not a prolific pass catcher regardless. David Montgomery, that is not a prolific pass catcher. So there's not really a reason for them to target him a ton. Not really interested in him. Not a ton interested in Tariq Cohen, but he would be my preferred back on this team. Allen Robinson always in play for the volume he gets. I think they put Wims on IR. I think he's hurt. So him and Anthony Miller both, I guess, are viable, but I don't think you need to run like multiple players from this game. So yeah, Anthony Miller actually at 5,100, not the worst price. Got he was averaging 10 targets a game over the past 3 games until last week, but he scored last week, so he ended up having a decent game as well, like a viable game. He's fine. Allen Robinson, one of the leading players in the league in terms of Whopper combined market share of targets and air yards. So, and you're going to get him at probably under 5% owned. Like that's what I look for Aaron Jones. But I think Aaron Jones last week is enough to push ownership up just a little bit. So I'd rather look for like a 2% or 3% Allen Robinson and instead of like Aaron Jones in this game. But really, I'm not awfully interested in this game. Let's move on. Another game it's hard to get interested in. It's Cincinnati hosting the New England Patriots. Cincy 10.5-point home dogs, a 42-point total. The total has moved up on this game, whereas it opened at 40.5. It's up 1.5. Julian Edelman, I think, is expected to play. Yeah, he's expected to play. So, and anybody with questions, I don't know if you jumped in late. I'll get to them all at the end. I'll just knock through all the games, do all the questions. So be patient. We'll get there, I promise. Yeah, so for this game, interestingly, Joe Mixon, I think, if you haven't season long, you weren't starting him at some point in the middle of the season, and that was the right thing, but they are just committed to getting him the ball. His touch totals in the past few weeks have been just nutty. He's got, just in terms of carries, 23, 19, 18, 15, 30, 17. That 31 was nuts because they were getting killed by the Ravens and just gave up. And you love when a team that knows they've lost gives up. Really great for them. And his targets in recent weeks, too, 4, fat 0 burger there, 3, 3, 4. Like, he's getting a decent amount of receiving work, not quite as much as last season, but a decent amount, and tons of carries. It's just so difficult for me. Another guy who, if it was a solid wide receiver play, I'd be a little more interested because I think you can get a little more off the beaten path with wide receiver. But I like the good plays at running back. I like my Christian McCaffreys, my Patrick Lairds. I think Dalvin Cook's in play. We'll talk about him later. I don't think there's any need to get too crazy with your running back spot. So for that reason, I'll probably be off Joe Mixon. And also, obviously, because he plays the best or maybe second best at this point rushing defense in the league to opposing running backs. I think in terms of fantasy points allowed, they're like one or first, second, or third least. We're up there with like Tampa Bay. So not really interested in him. If you wanted to run like a two-player stack in this game, John Ross without Auden Tate in the lineup, I am very interested in. They got John Ross a decent amount back in the game last week. He was playing about half the snaps, got 3 targets. It makes me think he's probably healthy. I don't know if he's 100%, but if in a player's first game back, they get about half the snaps already, I think we'll see him for pretty much a full game here. So I think he is viable, especially if you wanted to run him with Julian Edelman. Would be a very low-owned stack. I mean, John Ross, nobody's going to play him. I'm not sure. Right now I'm looking at Julian Edelman projected about 15% ownership. I'm not even sure it gets that high just because, one, he's rocking a questionable tag right now, even though he's expected to play, and 2, this game obviously isn't very stackable. So I think he's an interesting play at his price, 7,100 for a dude who's been targeted double-digit times in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games. I want to say that's like I heard somewhere that's like the number 2. It's either 8 or 9 games if I suck at counting. That's like number 2 record for consecutive games with double-digit targets. I forget who it's behind. It might be like peak Antonio Brown from a few years ago. I don't remember, but yeah, he is like truly record-setting in the targets he's getting. So I like him in this spot, especially against Bengals defense that I think is 31st in yards per target allowed. The running backs, I'm not as interested in. James White, always viable. Hardly even call him a running back at this point, although he has been getting more rushing work in recent weeks. So viable. I think if you wanted to, you could run a Brady. This could be actually an ugly quarterback stack. Brady, this would be a real ugly stack because the New England offenses look like trash. This game has a low total. I don't think you need to get here and anywhere outside of the Millie Maker or, whatever other large contest, the 50-cent one and the $3 and the dollar that are all 20 max except for the 50. That's like the mini max. I don't think you need to get here in anything that doesn't have, tens of thousands of entrants to hundreds of thousands. But if you wanted to, Brady, James White, Julian Edelman would not be a bad play. Rex Burkhead, I think last week got like more carries than Sony Michel. If not, it was close. So if there's a running back you're looking to, an actual running back, I can't imagine playing Sony Michel. His work has dwindled in recent weeks. He doesn't get he doesn't get any pass catching value, and he's just not good. Like, that's the third thing. He's bad. He hasn't done, he's been unimpressive this season, even in the context of this offense, which has produced some impressive games, like the impressive James White game. Just hasn't. He has not topped 100 yards once this season. Like, the only reason he has had any fantasy value is a few good touchdown games. Really, it's 3 games of a touchdown and then the 3 touchdown game. Outside of that, he has just been abysmal. Hasn't scored 9 points in 7 games. I know he's going to score 3 times this week now that I've talked that smack on him, but I can't imagine playing him. Yeah, last week he got 5 carries. I think Burkhead got 7. I'd be more interested in playing Burkhead. And of course, if you have the salary, this defense that was just producing touchdowns, like I don't know if I've ever seen another defense do early in the season. They've cooled off since against the Cincy offense. They're on the road, but man, they're 10.5-point favorites or whatever. Yeah, I like this defense a lot, and I think you could probably stack them with Burkhead. Would be a very interesting play. Or I think you really stack them with anyone. They're not super highly correlated. Burkhead would be probably my favorite, and I think you'd basically just run chalk after that because nobody's going to be running Burkhead New England stacks. So next game. Oh, and if you're running a stack of this game, Tyler Boyd also viable. I just love that slate breaking upside of John Ross. Last 2 seasons, he was like, I think, the most inefficient receiver in the NFL. Maybe not behind Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin sucked whenever he played for Buffalo and the Chiefs in the same year, but was like the number 1 or 2 most inefficient wide receiver in the league on like a per target basis. Last season, he buoyed that out by scoring a bunch of touchdowns. The season before that, he didn't play a ton and was awful. Early in this season, he just legitimately looked good. Like it looked like he got a foothold in the offense and that he was starting to get the pace of the NFL game or whatever coaches want to say about it, because he was a legitimately good player. So good for him. Fastest man in football and now starting to show like it. I wouldn't hate him this week. Next game, difficult game for me. It is the Chargers hosting Minnesota. Chargers are 1 point dogs, which has come down after opening at 2.5. I wouldn't mind betting the Vikings side now that the line has moved a bit. Chargers, one of the most inept coaching staffs. I think their franchise as a whole, like they've done a good job acquiring talent. Props to them for not re-signing Melvin Gordon while having a better running back on the roster. And really, you don't want to pay that much for running back anyways. But when you have Austin Eckler, you don't need to. 45-point total, I guess I should mention that. On the Chargers side, I mean, you can play anyone. They have all sporadically gotten volume. Mike Williams has gotten air yards every single week. It finally scored. I think it was last week. Finally scored. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. They played the Jags last week. I don't know. Finally scored. Was on pace to set the record for receiving yards without a touchdown. Will not do that season. Neither will Robert Woods, who was on pace to break that Mike Williams record. I would probably just go with whoever is lower owned. If they're all low owned, let me check. Mike Williams, very low owned. Keenan Allen, also low owned. Yeah, I think you could stack anybody. I would probably look to go a Keenan Allen, Mike Williams stack. It's like my fourth or fifth favorite ugly quarterback stack, and I don't get to that. So you could get to that if you're playing a lot of entries. I'd be fine just running a one-off of this game. And for me, on the other side, it's Dalvin Cook. I have no clue what we're going to get out of Adam Thielen. Hasn't played in like 6 weeks. He played like 10 snaps or something when he returned and then was like, nope, I can't do it. Cut the feed and didn't play. Crushed anybody who played him. I don't think I had a ton of Adam Thielen, if any, that week. So I think that is much less likely now because I think they saw that he wasn't ready then and gave him more time than he needed to come back. So I don't think it's actually very likely he exits. But I do think it's still possible that he comes back and isn't 100%, that he isn't just doesn't absolutely crush. And that's what you need in GPPs. So I probably wouldn't be looking to him. And because he's back, it also makes me concerned about Stephon Diggs. So because when Thielen was playing, Diggs was not even a 1B receiver. He was just essentially the number 2 receiver. So like Dalvin Cook, I think through 5 or 6 weeks was out targeting Stephon Diggs. And that brings me to my favorite play of this game, Dalvin Cook. Because he was questionable to play this week, early in the week, I don't think he'll be mega highly owned. I'm looking at under 10% Dalvin Cook. I got to get more Dalvin Cook in my life. And he's on the 4 p.m. slate, which I think if there's any chance Josh Jacobs misses, you want to be able to swap to DeAndre Washington. So I like playing these 4 p.m. players just because it gives me more optionality. And always I like playing them for that reason, but I think this slate is particularly good for that. Dalvin Cook under 10% owned, 8,900. He was chalk at like 9,500 at one point. 8,900 Dalvin Cook also provides good leverage if you don't run him with McCaffrey. You knock a little over 1,000 off. You maybe pay up a wide receiver, or just get a better defense or whatever. He's like been a target. I think he's number 2 in touches per game, maybe number 3 in touches per game because he missed basically an entire half. Before that, he was number 2 in touches per game, and they're without Alexander Mattison. And Alexander Mattison has been getting a decent amount of work even before Dalvin Cook got hurt. So with Alexander Madison out, I think they're not really going to have much of a choice. I mean, they could run preseason god Mike Boone, and I mean, he was good in the preseason, made me some preseason money. But they could run him. I think they still, because they're going from a number 2 back who they've run all season to Mike Boone, who probably has next to no touches this season. I think you obviously project Mike Boone for less touches than Alexander Madison. Those running back touches have to go somewhere. It's a Dalvin Cook week, baby. I think it's like my favorite spot to play Dalvin Cook. Tampered ownership, a suitable price on the slate with a ton of volume or a ton of value, and a great spot just because he's going to get so much work. That's probably it for me. I'm not running any Kyle Rudolph. I think last week he was out targeted by 2 tight ends on the team, Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith. He's been buoyed so much by touchdowns, and that is just not my scene to play guys like that. So you can play him if you want. I'm not banking on the touchdowns. I would run him back with one of the receivers. I guess we should talk about Austin Eckler last week. I think he got to the 100 on 12 touches. And, of course, he got pulled late in the game because they put in all their backups, including Tyrod Taylor. Ironically, there were rumors that Tyrod Taylor could get in because Philip Rivers was playing so bad. He did get in, not because Philip Rivers was playing bad. So, I don't 12 touches isn't enough for me to play a running back, especially what's his price? Austin, how much are you, Austin? Yeah, $6,700 for a back who got 12 touches last week. He's so efficient, and I love him. He's the better running back on the team. If he does well this week, you damn know I'm going to come back here in victory lap calling him the better running back. But I'm still not playing running back with 12 touches, and Melvin Gordon is bad and doesn't get all of his team's touches and doesn't get a ton of targets. Not playing him. Never playing him. Next game. We move into we're actually already on the 4 o'clock slate, but we move into maybe my favorite sneaky game of the week. It is Oakland versus Jacksonville. Oakland, 6.5-point home favorites. A 47-point total has come up 1.5. You can play all the dudes in this game because the total has come up. These are 2 of the worst defenses in the NFL right now. As of the past 3 weeks, these 2 teams have allowed 38 points per game. Both these teams just getting dunked on by every team they play. And imagine these 2 teams dunking on each other back and forth. It's a dunk contest, and that means all the fantasy points. I think if you're going to play ugly stacks, Derek Carr hasn't gone over 25 points, I don't think, once this season, maybe once. I don't even think he has. So I'd much rather look to Gardner Minshew and then run it back with a home favorite running back and Josh Jacobs. And then if you're stacking this game also, you leave yourself great options great swaptions late in the day. You can, if Josh Jacobs weren't to play, which right now all signs point to him playing. And, I think if they get him out there, he's probably going to play a decent amount. He's chasing Rookie of the Year title, still very much in contention with Kyler Murray and now probably A.J. Brown. I think they're going to give him a lot of work if he's out there. If he's healthy and able to play, he's going to be the lead back. Won't see a ton of receiving game work, but as a 6.5-point home favorite against Jacksonville's awful rush defense, man, he's a good play. And I think because we just found out, really, I wasn't confident he was playing until we got more reports this morning. We got confirmation that he was going to play this morning. He still could sit, be ready to swap, be checking your lineups at 4 o'clock or whatever, maybe 3:30 to be safe. But I think we're going to get pretty low-owned Josh Jacobs. I'm looking at 13% right now. I'd be even a little surprised if it gets up to that, and that's still pretty low for a dude who's in a smash spot against this awful defense as a massive favorite at home. So I would look to run him. And then, the Jacksonville receivers are so cheap. It takes so little for this stack to pay off that I'm going to be overweight on it by a lot. I don't think it takes a lot to be overweight on it. Gardner Minshew's got to be less than 1% owned. Yeah, he's looking at less than 1% owned. And I think because there's a lot of value, you've got Greg Ward, you've got Justin Watson, it's going to tamper Chris Conley and D.D. Westbrook's ownership. And you're going to get those guys at low owned. Their path to value is so easy. And I believe Oakland right now is allowing the most yards per attempt to opposing passers in the entire league. They have been crushed by opposing passers, as evidenced by allowing 38 points on average over the past 3 games. On the Jacksonville side, not interested. I think Nick O'Leary has gotten a decent amount of work lately. I'm not confident enough in playing him over Chris Conley, D.D. Westbrook. I'd rather play Keelan Cole. Keelan Cole more of a Millie Maker type play at 3K flat, but he'll run as the 3rd receiver. And it was either last year or 2 years ago that he broke out. He is a legitimate baller. He was a dominant player at I don't remember what small school, but he was a dominant small school player. Showed that either in his rookie or second year. Keelan Cole stats. Let me see how long ago that was. But yeah, like he broke out early in the NFL. If you got a dynasty league, man, pick up Keelan Cole. Yeah, in 2017, his rookie year out of college, as like I think he was a UDFA or a late round pick, 748 yards. Like I still believe Keelan Cole is a very talented receiver. He just hasn't found his way into the offense since his first season. So I think he's a fine play. I would only play him if you're running like heavy stacks in this game. But man, he's a all right play for being a great player. Yeah. Oh, Leonard Fournette, last player on this side that I'd look to. Not getting a ton of work, and he plays a defense that I'd more rather attack through the passing game. But he also, or not getting a ton of work, not getting a ton of fantasy points, not scoring a ton, getting a ton of work. I think he's second in the NFL in touches because over the past 4 weeks, 6 targets, 11, 12, 7, 6, 7. Beyond that, getting a ton of work, not putting a ton of fantasy value behind that. Has gone over 15 points twice in the past 5 weeks. Has gone over 25 once in the past like 8, 9 even. And that's part of playing Leonard Fournette is he's slow. We saw the 1 week where he had the 60-some yard carry. He ended, I think it was a 67-yard carry that he ended with fewer yards than that. Yeah. Oh, Lenny. Oh, Uncle Len. Yeah, it was against the Titans. That's what it was. It was a long time ago now. But he had a 67-yard carry to open the game, and he ended with 66 yards. Oh, sweet Uncle Lenny. But he also has multiple 100-yard games. He has the 200-yard game. And if you were going to have it again, it would definitely be against an awful Oakland defense. He could also get through the passing game. We saw those multiple double-digit target games. I think he's a fine play. And I think he's going to be relatively low owned. I think this game is going to go overlooked. So I think he's going to be relatively low owned, as opposed to weeks where we've had mega chalk Leonard Fournette. On the other side, like I said, Josh Jacobs, and if he doesn't play, DeAndre Washington will be probably like last week, he was like a 1% play. He'll maybe be closer to like a 5% play, but he'll be a 3-down back at like a 5% ownership at 4,700. You just have to find ways to swap. Like if you're running maybe like so you could run probably, I don't know the exact pricing. You could probably run like Todd Gurley and Leonard Fournette. And if DeAndre Washington ends up getting the start, you swap down from Gurley and swap up from Fournette to Dalvin Cook. I would sort of prepare scenarios like that. The same thing if you're playing Chris Conley in the flex. You could swap up to some receiver. You could swap down from like Gurley. You could swap down from Fournette and swap up from Conley to maybe even D.D. Westbrook. I don't know what the pricing looks like. So, yeah, I think that's all. Darren Waller without Hunter Renfrow, who's a major impact, negative impact on his receiving game work. Hunter Renfrow had a streak of like 4 or 5 pretty usable games, and all of those were like 4 of Darren Waller's worst games. Now without Foster Moreau, who wasn't fantasy viable in his own right, but has 5 touchdowns, had 5 touchdowns now on the IR. Without Foster Moreau, who had 5 touchdowns, that was the one big thing we were missing from Darren Waller's repertoire. Like I know through like 6 or 7 weeks, he was a top 3 fantasy tight end without a single touchdown. Scored a few, but then it's gone dry since. This is the perfect spot for him to bounce back. Tyrell Williams not getting a ton of volume. I'd probably be more interested in I am more interested in Darren Waller, who I think is one of the better tight end plays, or Josh Jacobs / DeAndre Washington. Next game, Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals are 3-point home dogs to the Cleveland Browns. 49-point totals come up 2.5 points. That is one of the biggest line movements or total movements of the slate. And this is a very interesting game with Kyler Murray being well underpriced. I think he's 5,600 if I remember. Oh, need some coffee. My voice is starting to hurt. We have, Kyler Murray. I would very much consider him for cash just because he is so cheap. And they've had 2 kind of dud performances in recent weeks, but I know one of them was against Pittsburgh, who is like, I think one of the better defenses in the league right now. Pretty healthy all around and just like dominant, like great playmakers on that team. Enough about Pittsburgh's defense. I don't really care about defense anyways. But Kyler Murray, a few down performances, but before that, he had 3 games of over 23. He has multiple games of over 30 this season, a ton over 25, and like has had a pretty consistent floor. Like sure, he's had some games of like single digit. He's had 1 game of single digit points, which if you played him in cash that week, bad beat. That was against the Giants too. That hurts. But this is like the cheapest we've seen Kyler Murray since the beginning of the season. Are you kidding me? Yeah, Kyler Murray at 5,600. And right now, I think he's not going to be like mega chalk. He's going to be a little chalky. But I think he's running back with Christian Kirk. potentially run him with Kenyon Drake. I think this is Larry Fitzgerald's last home game too, and he's gotten a little bit of a volume recently. Yeah, maybe that's the stack you run. Although I think the way we've seen Christian Kirk perform, like if he goes for 150 or whatever, like you need a single stack with Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray, like up in the NFL, like not leading the NFL, but close to leading the NFL in terms of rank. No one's ever going to beat Lamar Jackson in rushing value. So you can there are like 4 quarterbacks I think it's okay to run single stacks with, because if a quarterback is going to go for 30 points, there's almost no way that he doesn't bring 2 of his receivers with him. The way that he doesn't is through rushing value. Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and that's probably it. Those are probably the 4 quarterbacks I think can get there just based on a single receiver going off and the rushing value. So I think you can single stack Christian Kirk, but I don't hate the Larry Fitzgerald narrative. I don't know Cardinals schedule. Let me see. It might be his last home game. He'll come back next season, but his last home game of the year at least. Yeah, they play at Seattle and they play at Los Angeles. It could be his last home game. It's like 36 or something. So Larry Fitzgerald swan song narrative, more interested in Christian Kirk. And on the other side, I think, not Odell Beckham, because Odell Beckham doesn't seem to care about playing with the Browns anymore. Like there was the one play where he was not even in the huddle. He was just lined up out wide while the rest of the team was talking about the play they were about to run. Rumored that he talked to other teams. He doesn't want to be in Cleveland. I don't know if he'll stay in Cleveland. They might not trade him because, why would they? They just traded a boatload for him, and they'll probably get a significant discount, awful return on what they traded. So I'm not playing him, and Jarvis Landry is literally just the better receiver. It's like undisputable that he has been a more efficient, better fantasy receiver all season. Now he's finally priced like it, but at 6,700 against this Arizona defense, I'd be looking to run Jarvis Landry back with Kyler Murray and Christian Kirk. I think you can capture a lot of the fantasy value in this game by doing that, and just a lot of points in general. Outside of that, Nick Chubb at 7,900. Kareem Hunt's return has definitely greatly impacted his receiving game. It has had very little impact on his rushing game. I think he has just as many, or if not more, 100-yard games in Kareem Hunt's 4 or 5 games back as he did the rest of the season. Let me see here. He has 3 100-yard rushing games since Kareem Hunt's return, and 3 before that, but on a per game basis, that's a lot more. So I think he's a great play in a pace-up spot. Arizona also number 1, or I guess 32nd, depending on how you look at it, 32nd in opposing team time of possession. They play so fast that when they don't play particularly well, it gives the other team the ball instantly. So I think Nick Chubb holding the ball a lot is a great spot for him as a favorite against Arizona as well, as a favorite, really. I think he's one of the better tournament plays at running back. I doubt he'll be very highly owned because there's a lot of good running back plays, but I think he is good enough that I put him, it's worth mixing him in. Unlike other running backs we've talked about, I think he is in a better spot than Chris Carson. That's really what it comes down to, because I think both guys are in good spots. Neither I expect to get a lot of receiving game work, but I think the opposing matchup is much better because I don't care much about the Carolina Panthers being a run funnel. I care about them being a better team. Probably, yeah, definitely. They killed Carolina, being a better team than the Cardinals. And the pace up, the pace of this game, Nick Chubb, Cleveland, Arizona, is going to be much better than the pace of Russell Wilson and the awful Seahawks boring offense. Brian Schottenheimer, why do you do this to us? So yeah, I don't care too much for Chris Carson when you've got a player like Nick Chubb on the board. Outside of that, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, I'm not running back to the flow chart narrative. David Njoku didn't really get a ton of work last week. I think it was 3 targets and didn't play a ton of snaps. I'd rather run Kyler Murray than Baker Mayfield. Kyler Murray is just massively underpriced. I think you're playing him in cash. If you got the salary, look to the Tennessee game. But yeah, that's probably all I've got for this game. We move into a good game, and then we've got a boring one. So we've got I'll start with the boring one. We've got San Francisco versus Atlanta. And I say it's boring because Atlanta not expected to put up a fight. 11.5-point favorites are San Francisco, 49-point total. The total has come up, but it's partially because we've got the spread widening, open at 11, now 11.5. If I'm running San Francisco, George Kittle, a solid tight end value at the top of the spectrum. I think Tyler Higbee, Darren Waller are both better values. Ian Thomas is probably on par with him, just at a different price range. So I'm not super keen on George Kittle just because of price. Dude's a beast. Dude is, definitely the best tight end in the NFL. I don't think there's much to dispute. Travis, I think Travis Kelce is great, but he's on Patrick Mahomes' offense. It's easier for him to succeed. And Zach Ertz, PPR machine, but not quite as dominant of an athlete and a big playmaker. So I think George Kittle is the best tight end in the league. I don't think his price is great this week, just because there's so much other tight end value, kind of like running back this week. There are a lot of good plays, but there are a handful of great plays, and I'm going to look for the great plays. So I would rather look to Raheem Mostert, who, because people are so afraid of running backs by committee, I don't think he'll be mega highly owned when he is an 11.5-point lead dog favorite against the Atlanta rushing defense. I think he's one of the better plays. I think you stack him with the San Francisco defense, who are expected to crush Atlanta, and you call it a day. And I love this game because it's got a massive total. Yeah, I got to get more Raheem Mostert in my lineups. It's got a massive total, but it's very favored to San Francisco, so there's going to be a lot of plays run, but a lot of the points are going to San Francisco. That's perfect for a running back defense combo, in my opinion, because if I'm playing a defense, I want Atlanta to run a lot of plays. I just want them to suck on all those plays. And that's what's expected to happen here. It's exactly what's expected to happen. So that's probably how I'd look to attack it. On the other side, Julio Jones is going to be 1 to 2% owned. He hasn't gotten the volume this season. It's going to be no. I'm looking at Julio Jones closer to 6 or 7% owned. Not worth it at that. If you think he's going to be lower owned, I think he's a great play. But really, he's on a pace for a 7-year low in receiving yards. They're without Calvin Ridley, so that probably gives it a boost. But I think the biggest impact has been Austin Hooper's breakout, not Calvin Ridley. Because Calvin Ridley was there last year. He wasn't doing as much on a per-game basis, but he still existed, whereas Austin Hooper didn't really do much last year compared to his massive, massive breakout this year. So I'd rather run it back with Austin Hooper, but he's in that George Kittle range where he's a good, not great play. If you think he correlates well with what you're trying to do in this game, so if you want to run him with Raheem Mostert, no defense, that's probably how you'd attack it. I think it's just the best play is Raheem Mostert, 49ers defense, move on. So to our final game of the slate, we have Dallas versus the Rams. This line is hilarious. It opened Dallas at home. They're similar teams. Dallas gets 3 points on the spread. That means that they're supposed to be equal teams on a neutral field. Everyone slams the Rams because Dallas sucks. Jason Garrett can't coach. They only beat bad teams. And now it's Rams -1. What a joke, Dallas. Come on. I think they've only beaten bad teams this season. I'm not actually positive that is the case. Dallas schedule. But this game is just rife for fantasy points is the thing. It's a 48.5 total. It's come up a half point despite that wacky line movement. Todd Gurley getting almost vintage Todd Gurley work. Not quite there, not quite where it's just team jam him in. But at 6K, he is just a stone cold lock. And this is one of the few players this week. Like I said at running back, I'm kind of just eating the chalk at running back. I think the chalk at running back this week outside of a Chris Carson is really good. It's well worth paying for, especially when I think I'm going to be very different running ugly quarterback stacks. I don't think a ton of people are, I'm looking at ownership projections, and even if they're wildly incorrect, even if they're off by 5 to 7%, which would be a lot, nobody's playing Gardner Minshew. Nobody's playing David Blau. So, I think I can be different enough there that I can run chalk running backs. And also, I'm going to be off Chris Carson, so I don't have to run the chalkiest of running backs. Actually, he's the number 2 chalk right now. So, I think Todd Gurley at 6K is just a bad misprice. This is on DraftKings. I have no clue what he's at on FanDuel. I have my FanDuel projections up, but I don't play as much on there. So, I don't have the prices memorized like I have everybody's prices memorized on DK. Yeah, at 6K, as now a favorite, I don't see how you don't play Todd Gurley. Also in a game with a great total. And I think he hasn't gotten enough receiving game work that I really ever consider stacking him with Jared Goff. So on the other end, they've got I would assume Jalen Ramsey shadows Amari Cooper. And in that case, you just get their real number 1 receiver, Michael Gallup, on an island facing whoever their second corner is. Can't be as good as Ramsey. I love Michael Gallup, and I think if you're also getting Amari Cooper shut down, that has to funnel a decent amount of work to Randall Cobb, who has had multiple 100-yard games this season. For a dude who I just thought was dust, I thought he didn't have a chance. I thought he might not even make it through training camp. Has really caught on with Dallas. props to him and props to us for playing him whenever you have. I think this is a great spot to play him. I think it's very viable to run Dak. And I wouldn't hate running the tight ends either Blake Jarwin, who's gotten a decent amount of volume, more volume as of late, and he is a massive playmaker, or Jason Witten, who just catches so many of those sweet PPR point passes. Tight end's too good to play any of those guys this week. So I would run Dak, Michael Gallup, Randall Cobb. If you want to be that dude who plays Amari Cooper in the worst matchup, I don't blame you. I am a big cornerback matchups are too noisy to really care about. But there are some outlier situations where even I'm concerned, much like I don't care about defense. I do care about New England. That is a darn good defense. I don't want to play guys against them. I don't care about cornerback matchups. I do care about Jalen Ramsey. Dude's a beast. So, and also I just think that could also, even his presence could not maybe it doesn't really matter too much in terms of if Amari Cooper is targeted, he'll still do fine. If possible, they just scheme to look away from Ramsey regardless. It could be that cornerback matchups don't matter as much as they impact coaches' decisions to scheme away from them. And in that case, yeah, I'm probably looking to Gallup. Although Amari Cooper in play, I just think it's a safer bet to run Michael Gallup. I don't have a ton of love for Zeke. He's now an underdog. He hasn't got a ton of receiving game work, and he hasn't been as explosive as he has been in years past. I didn't have a ton of love for him before, and now that he's an underdog, definitely not playing him. On the other side, Higbee at 3,900 is if I have the salary, I think he's the best tight end play of the week in terms of points per dollar, up there with Ian Thomas and Darren Waller. Robert Woods getting all of the snaps, all of the volume, still underpriced for his role. And man, Cooper Kupp out here killing me because I still think he is one of the better wide receivers in the role that he plays. Maybe he's not athletically as gifted as Julio Jones, but the role he was playing early in the season, getting all of those slot works, was Michael Thomas-esque. And since then, he is just they've completely schemed him out of the game. And I don't get why a team would remove Sean McVay, for as smart as you are so dumb. So he's much more of a deep GPP play, but because of how little he's been he played 19 snaps last week. They were running these awful 2 tight end sets, getting Josh Reynolds involved, getting Brandon Cooks out of there. I don't know what they're doing. And for that reason, it's hard to play Cooper Kupp, but he is going to be low owned, and this is a good game to stack. So I think he's fine, but he doesn't project well. He's just that's how a lot of GPP plays are. So that's everything I have for the main slate. Fire through some questions. We've been on here forever. So my apologies for keeping everybody, but I hope I hope we can take down some cash this week. I hope Bobby can take down some cash because I'm going to need a kickback. Bobby, I don't know if you're listening. I'm going to need a kickback. All right, first question. Hi guys. Just Guy this time. Well, you guys have been on spot on. QB and defense for FanDuel head-to-heads. FanDuel, the pricing, at least at quarterback, works out to be pretty similar. I don't think the Kyler Murray value is quite as there. Let me see. Yeah, I think Kyler Murray is more appropriately priced on FanDuel. So just pivot to either Deshaun Watson or Ryan Tannehill. I'm afraid of the Ryan Tannehill collapse, so I'm not as interested in him. I'd rather pay the extra $600 on FanDuel for Deshaun Watson. But if you don't have the salary, you don't have the salary. $7,600 for Tannehill is a good price as well. And his team at 27 and a quarter, 27 and a half implied, maybe there's 27 implied team total. And he has gotten so many of their points. It's either him, you can just split their touchdowns 50-50 with him and Derrick Henry. And there's probably even a little bit of a lean to Ryan Tannehill because of his rushing value. So as much as I don't think he's that great of a quarterback, he does project as one of the better plays of the slate. I would try and get up to Deshaun Watson. And then at defense, I know Kansas City is underpriced. They're just massive home favorites, and that's the spot you want your defense in, especially in cash. In tournaments, I can see you going to higher totals. But, in cash, I just want to lock up a home favorite and not pay a ton for them. At 3,900 Kansas City against Denver, I know Drew Lock has looked good, but you're a 10-point home favorite. So I think they're great. Tampa Bay as big favorites at 3,800, I think is an interesting tournament play, especially if you could run Tampa Bay and maybe in tournaments you could run Tampa Bay and Ronald Jones. You run a lot of risk of getting Peyton Barber vulture touchdowns, which he had 2 weeks ago, I think, but it's not a bad play. Outside of that, if you need to pay all the way down, there's not really anyone to pay all the way down for. Maybe Cincy at 3K on the dot, just the way New England's offense has looked, but I think that's too thin of a play for me. I'd rather look if you find the 500 and go Arizona, They've got Chandler Jones. Baker Mayfield has been one of the most turnover-prone players in the league this year. Yeah, I think Arizona at 3,500 is as low as I'd be willing to pay. So, I guess to answer the question, Deshaun Watson, Kansas City. There we go. Next question, season-long full PPR, Boyd, Amendola, Miller, Perriman. I do have Winston as my quarterback as a side note. Perriman, I do like the idea. Stacking in season-long is massively underrated, but in this case, I'm just not confident in Perriman's role. But I do like the thought process because I try and stack on all of my season-long. Even, it's the same thing. You just open up so much upside. So Amendola, Miller, Boyd. I would run Boyd. I would just take actually, you know what? Yeah, I would run Boyd. I think you take the volume and move on with it. But if you think the New England defense is that daunting that you're willing to take the discount on the volume Boyd is going to see, I would take Amendola. But I'm all volume all day, and Boyd is probably the leader in that. So Singletary or Laird? I would run Laird. I think he's in a much better spot than Singletary. But I mean, those are both good options. Shout outs to you for having those options. I just think you get I guess if it was like a standard no PPR league, I would run Singletary because I don't think Laird's going to get a ton of work on a ton of success on the ground. Last week he had I think 14 carries for 50 yards or something. I think that's a reasonable projection for him. I think you really want him because he is going to, full PPR. Why can't I read? Jesus. Full PPR Laird. I just think, and he could also be split out wide. He was split out wide in college at multiple times this season. Or this past season, I guess. In his past 2 seasons at what he played, Cal, I think. He was split out as a wide receiver. I think with the injuries they have at wide receiver this week, we could see a lot of that. So Laird for me, just because I think Pittsburgh's defense is good. The total in that is low, and Laird's in a smash spot. Carlos Hyde or Sony Michel. Carlos Hyde, I actually think this is a decent chance for Bill O'Brien to establish it against an offense that's been very successful in recent weeks. And of course, he'd be doing that with Hyde. And Sony Michel is trash. He's just awful. You can cut him. Josh Jacobs, James White, Raheem Mostert, start 2. I would start Jacobs, Mostert, although I think Mostert White is a viable swap. But my top 2 would be Jacobs, Mostert. And if you started Jacobs White and Mostert doesn't actually, I would start Jacobs White because that leaves you with the option to swap out, especially if you don't have a good fourth running back. It leaves you with the option to swap out Mostert for Jacobs in the event that Washington plays and Jacobs sits. So Jacobs White because you really do. If you open yourself to a zero burger, you're done. So yeah, Jacobs White. Good morning. I need 2 for PPR. Emmanuel Sanders, Miles Sanders, Raheem Mostert, and Cooper Kupp. Don't make me choose against Cooper Kupp. Because of the points, the implied total, I would lock in Emmanuel Sanders. Actually, I like the correlation play. Go Emmanuel Sanders, Raheem Mostert, and just roll with it. Other than Gurley, best running back in cash, Patrick Laird, easily. Patrick Laird, I think, is the best running back in cash because I think he especially on DK. On DK, I think he'll push up for the highest targets for a running back. So best cash wide receiver. I think it's a coin toss between Greg Ward at 3K flat and Chris Conley. I think Chris Conley has a solid floor of targets and just a massive upside because I think he's going to get a lot of targets and he's going to get a ton of air yards. So I think Chris Conley is the best because of his floor ceiling combo, but at 3K, it's hard to beat Greg Ward's price. I would take Chris Conley with a close second, Greg Ward. Then you've got D.D. Westbrook, Slayton, Justin Watson, those type of guys. PPR. Almost our last question. PPR. Kupp, Metcalf, Pascal. Metcalf. Yeah, definitely Metcalf. Especially in PPR. I think I'm just not confident any of these guys getting much work, as opposed to Metcalf, who, despite being a ton of air yards, also just gets more targets at this point than Cooper Kupp. Or maybe not Pascal. Pascal gets a lot of work, but against the Saints defense, they have a low implied team total. I like Metcalf. Non-PPR, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown. It hurts me, but A.J. Brown for sure. Non-PPR, Mac or Mostert. Mostert. His team is implied for so many points. Maybe leading the main slate and maybe even leading the entire weekend or week, I guess. Best pay up at wide receiver. So this is interesting. I think if you're running if you were to run Deshaun Watson cash, if you had that in your repertoire, I would say it's solid to stack him with DeAndre Hopkins. But now with Will Fuller back, I'd rather just look to Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin is probably just the number one wide receiver on the main slate, number two wide receiver on the entire slate, only behind Michael Thomas. Yeah, Chris Godwin. Although if you're running Deshaun Watson, you have to prioritize DeAndre Hopkins. But in a vacuum, Chris Godwin. Laird or Mixon? Laird, baby. Praise the Laird. Also, would you start Stephon Diggs, Laird, or Mixon? Oof. I'd go Laird. I think you get a lot bigger floor with Laird than you get with Diggs, who hasn't been crushing as of late. Like last week, I think in particular, I played him and it didn't work out. Now with Adam Thielen back, I guess it's a floor ceiling thing. I guess in the playoffs, if you're playing good teams, you would assume that you're assuming you're playing good teams. I would run Diggs. If you're for some reason a massive favorite in the playoffs, I think you lock in just as many targets with Laird as you do with Diggs, or at least close to it. I would project Laird for 6 to 7 targets and Diggs for like 8 or 9. So you lock in just as many receptions, if not, you probably lock in as many receptions with Laird's catch rate. And obviously the rushing work, but Diggs, of course, has a higher upside. So I would say, as long as you're playing a competent team, Diggs. But if you think you're going to win, Laird gives you a much higher floor. So yeah, I'd say Diggs, but it's close. And if for some reason you think you've got like a massive edge, just play Laird. Lock in the PPR points. All right, we've been here for an hour, 11 minutes, and 11 seconds. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. You can catch myself and Bobby at Wednesday at 8:15, I believe is when we start, breaking down what will be the last like normal main slate, week 16, until we get in some weird slates for week 17. So you can catch that Wednesday at 8:15 Eastern time PM. So for myself, for him, wish him luck in Miami, chasing a fat $2 million. We'll catch you next week.